Coming up, Egor Demin suffers an injury setback entering the start of Nets training camp. What is his timeline, and will he be ready for the season opener? I'll answer that after this.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. I'm Erik Slater, Brooklyn Nets beat reporter for ClutchPoints.com. Thank you for making me your first listen of the day. The show is 100% free on all those great platforms. And on today's show, I'm going to be reacting to some Egor Demin injury news. I'll also dive into some comments we got from Brooklyn's top pick about his rookie season and other news and notes from Media Day. But we had Nets Media Day yesterday at HSS Training Center in Brooklyn. I was on hand, spoke to all of the players and Sean Marks and Jordi Fernandez. And a lot of what was said was to be expected. There were some surprises, the biggest of which was this Egor Demin injury news. And Sean Marks revealed that Egor has been tending to a plantar fascia tear that started to become an issue sometime after Summer League. We know Egor made the 4 appearances in Las Vegas and looked healthy and, didn't look like he had any issues there. But sometime after that, this cropped up and began an issue. And Sean said that Egor has been limited, following Summer League and that he hasn't had the summer that he necessarily was hoping for. So this is something where, it looks like he's been dealing with this, and it's going to be something the Nets have to manage, through the beginning of training camp. And here's what Sean said about it exactly, so there's nothing left in translation. I asked him about the timetable and whether Egor is going to be ready for the season opener, and he said he'll be limited for the first part of camp in what he's going to be doing, but hopefully there's a buildup through the first couple of weeks, and then he gets out there. But we have no issues with thinking that he's going to miss the start of the season or anything like that. So there you have it. As of now, from Sean Marks, Egor is expected to be ready for the start of the regular season. And for those of you who don't know, the plantar fascia, it's a foot injury. The plantar fascia is a band of tissue. It's located on the bottom of your foot, and it connects your heel bone to the toes. You guys have probably heard of plantar fasciitis. This is a plantar fascia tear. And, from what I've read online, I'm not a doctor, but the healing timeline for a tear seems like it can range from several weeks to several months, depending on its severity. And based on the comments from Sean and Egor, this doesn't appear to be that significant of a tear, given that Sean said that he's going to be ready for the start of the regular season. But if there's one thing that I've learned on the Nets beat, it's to take any Nets injury updates or timelines with a grain of salt. I've been through this with a lot of players. I'm not saying that this isn't the case and Egor isn't going to be ready for the start of the regular season, but, they have a tendency to downplay some of this stuff sometimes. So we will see. And with what Sean said, the big thing that he said is hopefully there's a buildup through the first couple of weeks. So that means that, Egor is probably going to be limited for at least the first couple of weeks, which means that I'm not expecting him to play in the preseason opener, which is about 10 days away. And then you look at the season opener and it's a month away. So, if it's something that he's already been dealing with for, extended period after Summer League, which was, in early July, you would think that he would be ready, for the start of the regular season, because that will be months at that point. And they're not saying, anything that would lead you to believe that this is a serious plantar fascia tear. And Mark's saying that he'll be ready for the start of the regular season. That obviously counts for something. So we'll see. It's, not ideal for Egor to be dealing with this, but from what I know, this isn't something that he's dealt with in the past or has been like a reoccurring issue. And again, not a doctor, but from what I've read on plantar fascia tears, there's something that if they're, treated correctly, don't, have like necessarily like a high rate or definite, thing to be reoccurring, and you're going to have to deal with moving on. And what Egor had to say about it, he downplayed it. He said, well, the injury itself, I'm assuming it's not that big of a deal at this point, but it's something that comes with volume over time. It wasn't like a moment where I was like, oh, that's when it happened. I'm not a doctor, so it's hard for me to even tell what's going on with it. So for me, it's just important to stay present. I'm trying to focus on whatever plan I have from the physicians and whatever timing I have from them. So, Egor, smart kid, seems to have a good head on his shoulders, obviously. And, I don't think that this plantar fascia tear will be, a huge story or that big of a deal in the long run. But in the short term, it's something to monitor. And it's something that, even if Sean Marks says that he's going to be ready for the start of the regular season. We're going to have to monitor and see how he develops throughout training camp. So I have plenty of updates on that. But we also had other comments from Egor that I thought were interesting and I thought were encouraging. And, one of them was, you look at Egor's strengths, his weaknesses. We talked about his expectations numerous times going into this rookie season. And, I asked Egor at Media Day yesterday what he felt was I asked all the rookies what they felt their main growth areas were, like where they had the most room to improve, what they were going to be focusing on, and how they were going to be attacking those weaknesses, in off-season work and into the season. I thought, interestingly enough, Egor said the top thing that he said was playing through contact and playing with physicality and, being ready to handle that and, deliver force to people in the NBA. And I thought that was really encouraging to hear because I think, if you've seen Egor play, these strengths are apparent. Like he has incredible size at 6'9". He's regarded as the best passer in the draft. He's just an elite court mapper, can manipulate defenses, sees openings, can make passes that other people can't. And at his size, while he's not an elite ball handler, for a guy who's 6'9", like he does have, fluid ball handling ability, even if it's not like even if he doesn't have the most shake, he doesn't have the most separation and all of those things, he can handle the ball. The thing that he struggled with a lot is playing through contact. And you watch this at BYU when he drove to the basket, he doesn't have an elite first step. And with that, if you don't have an elite first step, you kind of have to be able to get into people, use physicality to get to the rim. And Egor wasn't necessarily able to do that. He was a guy who got bumped off of his spot a lot. I think that lack of physicality obviously made it difficult for him to finish up and through the rim because he's not, even though he's 6'9", he's not an above the rim finisher. He's a guy who finished below the rim, the majority of the time. So if that's the case, playing through contact's important. Also ball handling. We've heard about his struggles and seen at Summer League, his struggles handling ball pressure. And I talked to Nets Summer League head coach Steve Hetzel about that and, asked him at Summer League why Egor was spending so much time off the ball and whether that was by design or whether that was just kind of the way things were playing out. And Hetzel said that it was the way that things were playing out and that they wanted him to do a little bit more things on the ball. But at this point, he needs to, improve his physicality, improve his strength to be able to hold NBA level defenders who are, trying to pressure him, hold them off and be able to get comfortably into sets. So playing through contact, physicality, adding strength, that is the number one thing that I, feel like should be the emphasis for Egor entering the rookie season. Obviously, there's a lot of skill work and on the court things that are, go without saying, but this is going to be the baseline for everything. Because if Egor can't play through contact, if he can't handle the physicality, that's really going to expose all of his weaknesses and it's not going to allow him to, accentuate his strengths or let those strengths shine. So this, base, the strength, the physicality, all of that is going to be the base. And Egor, I'm really happy that was the first thing that he said when I asked for his main growth area, because I think that that's correct. And it seems in lockstep with what the Nets coaches have been saying. And, what does that look like? Adding strength, playing through physicality, eating a lot. You got to eat a lot. You got to lift a lot. Obviously, you need to learn how to on the court play with physicality and play. There's technique to that. But the first step is, throwing that weight on. Egor's like 6'9", 200 pounds right now. He's going to need to add to that, slight frame so far. But we talked to him and, we asked him about Brooklyn and living in Brooklyn and what does he like so far. And he said that, he's a foodie. He likes to eat. And he said that he's found a lot of spots. So my advice to Egor, and I'm sure the Nets coach's advice, would be eat as much of that stuff as possible and just live in the weight room. And Egor is a smart kid, and it seems like that's the way that he's approaching this. So I think that's a real positive. The injury setback news is a negative, but it doesn't seem like it's something that's necessarily going to hamper him long-term or, into the season for the foreseeable future. So we will see with that, but it does mean that other Nets point guards are going to have added reps early in training camp, and that is obviously going to be the rookies, Ben Saraf and Nolan Troy. So what am I hearing about those guys? What are my expectations for them stepping into roles? I'll touch on all that when I continue Locked On Nets after a quick break. But before that, want to tell you about our friends over at FanDuel. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Guys, FanDuel fits however you like to bet, player props, building a same-game parlay, or even jumping in live as the action unfolds. It makes every game more exciting, whether you're watching your team or just keeping an eye on your fantasy lineup. It's quick, easy, and the best way to add a little more energy to Sundays. So are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. Coming back from the break on today's Locked On Nets episode, talking about Egor Demin's injury and everything else we heard at Nets Media Day. And Demin is going to be limited for the start of training camp. Probably not going to miss the season opener, but is going to miss probably the preseason opener, which is going to open reps in what is obviously an extremely crowded Nets backcourt featuring the rookies with Egor Ben-Saraf and Nolan Troy, also Cam Thomas, Kobe Buffkin, all these guys. But, Nolan Troy and Ben-Saraf are the other true point guards on this roster. We talked to Kobe Buffkin. He said that he envisions himself more as a combo guard. I think with all the point guards that the Nets have, that he'll probably spend time at that position. So I'd expect, Nolan Troy and Ben-Saraf to get added reps at the start of training camp. And Ben-Saraf was a big topic of conversation at Nets Media Day. We heard from several players. We heard comments from Sean Marks, all of which talked about how well Saraf has played. And they were really raving about what he's been able to do during these open runs. And, I posted that on Twitter. Some Nets fans, were excited about it. There was obviously, a large Saraf contingent of people, from his home country that were really excited about it. So we'll see. But, am I surprised to be hearing this? Like, I'm not all that surprised. Looking at Saraf's game, I've spoken about it. I've said I've thought that he's going to be a guy who will spend some time in the G League probably to open the season. So I'm not, no rookie I don't think is going to be like a net positive player in the NBA, but I don't necessarily think Saraf or Troy really are like that built to, be, to have an easy transition into the NBA. But despite that, I'm not too surprised to hear about him showing flashes and open runs, because if you've seen Saraf play, he has a flashy game. He has, if you listen to the Nets Scout series, when the scouts were talking about him in their meetings, one of them said that he has a flair for the game. And I think that that's a good way to describe him. He has a really nice handle at his size. He has a lot of crafty moves, whether crossovers or spin moves, getting to the basket. And he does play the game with a little bit of flair. So when you're playing in open runs, we've all done it. Like, that's a good way to get noticed. And, those types of plays obviously draw some oohs and ahs, and they draw recognition. And we had, Michael Porter Jr., Terrence Mann spoke about, Saraf showing flashes. Sean Marks also alluded to him playing well. So with Egor being limited at the start of camp, we'll see. And, it kind of has raised a question in my mind of who is better suited, to step in early in the season. Not that Egor's going to miss time, but just as a thought process between Ben-Saraf and Nolan Troy, because they are the two guys behind Egor Demin. And I've thought Troy, in the past, just because of the two, neither of them are good shooters, but Saraf, I think, is a worse shooter. So I think that could make things more difficult for him. But if you're talking about all three of these point guards from a size perspective, Saraf has the most NBA built, NBA ready body right now. He's 6'6" with a 6'8" wingspan. So he has just incredible size and length for his ball handling ability and what he's able to do in that regard. And he's also 200 pounds. So he's a little bit of a stockier guy at his size, as opposed to guys like Demin and Troy, who are a little bit slighter. So he may be able to match the physicality of the NBA game better than these other two Nets rookie point guards. But I will say, the jump shot, he's never really looked like even a decent jump shooter at this point in his career. So I think that will present challenges for him and make the advantage creation a little bit more difficult for him at the NBA level against better NBA level defenders. But it is also something where you could say he'll have better spacing at the NBA level. He'll have better structure. But, there's a lot of different ways that you could look at it. I think Saraf playing well in these open runs is interesting. I do think that, maybe he's a guy who could step in and start the season in Brooklyn. I do think he's probably going to be in the G League if I had to guess. But we don't know. If he comes out and he takes advantage of these added opportunities and added reps that he'll have early in camp, maybe he's in, Brooklyn and some other guys are in Long Island. So we'll see. But I am encouraged to hear that Saraf's playing well. And in Troy's case, also going to get an opportunity. And I think that, it'll be exciting to see what he can do. I've outlined, what I expect from Troy, and I expect his speed to be on full display. I think he'll get out in transition. We've heard so much about how the Nets want to play. And I think that is something, like you're talking about Traore and his skill set, I do think it really, meshes with how the Nets want to play in the half court, and in transition, because obviously the Nets want to play fast. They want to play in the transition games. They want to get up a lot of shots. And that was one of Traore's biggest strengths, at the pro level in France and at his other stops, was in transition. He's obviously a blur, regarded as one of the fastest players in the draft. And he finished and, scored at a very efficient clip in transition last season. So that obviously tailors itself to the Nets game, as does the advantage creation, the ability to get downhill, touch the paint, get the ball in rotation, create catch and shoot threes. But I would say that, he's not a good shooter either. None of these guys shot well last season. And unlike Saraf, he is, slighter. He's 6'4", 6'6" wingspan or 6'8" wingspan, something like that. So, good size and length also, but is a little bit shorter and, came in at 175 weight at the combine. So a little bit of a slighter frame that I think will make it more difficult for him to get downhill, finish at the rim and things along those lines, because like, Demin and Saraf, he is also a below the rim player, but he's going to get added reps. Saraf's going to get added reps, but right now Saraf is the player that is drawing the most buzz, and he's going to get more opportunities in Nets training camp early on and probably in the Nets first preseason game. So we'll have, a lot more to hear about him, obviously, and a lot more to break down with him. But we have one more injury update that I did think was significant and could say something about the Nets roster plan. So who was it? What does it mean? I'll get into all that when I close out Locked On Nets after a quick break. Guys, when I found out Skims was making underwear for men, I was intrigued. I've heard so much about their quality from friends and family, so I got to tell you, I had to give it a try. And let me tell you, it lives up to the hype. I've always had issues with underwear, fit, comfort, just finding the right style for me. Skims changed all of that. Their men's line offers something for everyone, from boxer briefs to classic briefs, all designed with the perfect balance of comfort and style. Guys, I tried the Skims 5-inch boxer brief, and I'm hooked. These are perfect for my active lifestyle. They move with me. They never lose their shape, and trust me, they stay in place all day. So whether I'm working out or just running errands, they're the most comfortable and reliable underwear I've ever owned. Plus, the lightweight material feels amazing, almost like you're wearing nothing at all. Guys, shop Skims Men's at skims.com. Let them know we sent you. After you place your order, select podcasts in the survey and select my show in the drop-down menu that follows. Coming back from the break, closing out today's Locked On Nets episode, talking about all the biggest news and notes from Brooklyn's media day yesterday. And we had a couple other injury updates, the first of which was Drake Powell, who has been dealing with tendinopathy in his knee, did not play in Summer League, and he is not playing 5-on-5 yet. But Sean Marks did say that he hopes that Powell will be ready to play preseason games. So we'll see. That's obviously an ambiguous injury update. But if Sean's hoping that he's ready to play preseason games, if he hasn't played 5-on-5, I wouldn't expect him to be ready for the Nets preseason opener, which is about 10 days away. But they do have their games in Macau, China, and then they close it out against the Toronto Raptors. So we'll see. I think that, Drake, it doesn't seem to be too serious of an injury at this point, like no structural damage to his knee, but it's clearly something that he's been managing for an extended period. So we'll have to wait for some more updates on that. But the other noteworthy injury update was Haywood Highsmith, who the Nets obviously acquired in that trade with the Miami Heat, got a second-round pick alongside him in what was a salary dump. But Haywood has been dealing with a meniscus injury and had surgery on his meniscus on August 8th, right before he was acquired by the Nets. But he told us at media day that he expects to be ready for the start of the regular season. And that was a surprise based on what Haywood's timeline was expected to be before this. I said he had that surgery on August 8th, and the Heat said at that point that he was going to be sidelined for 8 to 10 weeks. And 10 weeks, the high end of that timeline, would put him out, right until before opening night, like a few days before the Nets open the season on October 22nd in Charlotte. And usually with these injuries, even if like that timeline is 10 weeks, players take a little bit of time to ramp up after that, especially, with the Nets. We've heard about the ramp up with all these different players. So, Haywood said, despite that timeline putting him right up to opening night and right before it, that he expects to be ready for that season opener. And that's the plan right now. And I think that is significant, because I always thought that the Nets were going to hold on to Haywood into the season and that he would be a part of the roster to start the year after that trade. But the Nets do have 3 partially or non-guaranteed players in Jalen Wilson, Drew Timme, and Tyrese Martin. And for any of those guys to make the roster, they would have to, the Nets would have to waive a guaranteed player, because they have 15 guaranteed standard contracts, which is the most that you're allowed to carry during the regular season. So if any of those 3 non-guaranteed guys were to make it, then that's we're going to have to waive somebody. And who are the options? I pointed to Dariq Whitehead could maybe be an option, although I felt it was unlikely. And the other guy was Haywood Highsmith. If he was not, if the injury was not coming along in the way that maybe the Nets had hoped, and they didn't think that he was going to be ready for the regular season, I could see him in that scenario being waived. But this pretty much kills that. And this pretty much confirms that he's probably going to be on the roster into the regular season. And I think that makes sense, because if he's a guy who is ready to play and that meniscus injury is right and he can return and play well, he's a guy who's on a $5.9 million expiring contract. And if he plays well as part of this rotation, I would expect the Nets to probably be able to flip him for value at the deadline if they want to. They could also obviously extend him, but he's a guy who I could see having some value, whether to the Nets or to another team moving forward, because he's a player who, has been a rotation player for a playoff caliber team for several years. He's a guy who played in the finals and in the Eastern Conference finals and in high leverage playoff games. And other comments that Haywood gave to us, really just made it clear that he's, going to be a part of this and that he's invested in this, at least, for the start of the regular season. And he said, stepping in a leadership role. And I think that that's something that, it gets talked about a lot with some of these other guys that the Nets have, but the Nets now have 3 veterans in Michael Porter Jr., Terrence Mann, and Haywood Highsmith, who have played, high leverage playoff basketball. Like Porter Jr. won a championship. Haywood Highsmith won an Eastern Conference championship, both as members of the rotation. Terrence Mann has played in high leverage playoff games and had huge, performances in elimination games. So I don't think that can be undervalued. I think that is important for a Nets team that has the biggest, class of rookie first-round picks in NBA history. And then also talking about Haywood, like we know the skill set, we know what he's done in the past. He's been a 3-and-D guy. He's been a guy, former D2 player who really had to scrap and claw for everything that he's gotten in the NBA and has done just a great job of that up to this point. And a lot of that was on the defensive end of the floor. And we know that Jordi Fernandez wants this team to have a defensive identity. He wants them to guard 94 feet. That's things that we saw, were an emphasis last season. And players like Dennis Schroeder, like Zaire Williamson, like Keon Johnson really bought into that. And it seems like Haywood is going to be another one of those guys. He said he's already had conversations with Jordi about, what the importance of defense is going to be to what Jordi wants to do. And Haywood's spoken with him about how he feels he can accentuate that and really drive that point home with these Nets rookies. He said that I've guarded, some of the best players in the NBA and I've pressured them 94 feet. And I think that I've done a good job of that. And he thinks that he has a lot to impart on these younger Nets guys in terms of mindset, in terms of how you approach things on that end of the floor. And he's also said that he's excited to, show what he can do in other regards. So those comments, the injury timeline from Haywood expecting to be ready or planning to be ready for the season opener, all to me confirms that he's going to be a part of this Nets team. And I'm excited to see what he can do with this new situation. But that does it for this episode of Locked On Nets. Hope you guys really enjoyed the show. I'll have more updates from training camp coming up all throughout the week. But if you do not already, make sure to subscribe to Locked On Nets on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts, whether Apple Podcasts or Spotify. If you enjoyed the show, take a second, smash that like button, leave a comment. Anything you can do to engage is much appreciated. But I'll be at Nets practice tomorrow. I'll have more updates and more to talk to you guys about when I'm back tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.